To understand how Thailand ended up hunting Somkid Pumpwang a second time, we have to go back to the beginning, to a wave of killings that unfolded across the country's rural north and northeast in the early 2000s. The victims were young women. Many worked in the entertainment industry or in massage parlors. Their disappearances did not always make the front pages. That silence was not an accident. It was, in the eyes of investigators who later reconstructed his method, a feature, a specific vulnerability that Somkid exploited with disturbing consistency. He would meet a woman. He would take her to a small motel or hotel, an anonymous room paid for in cash, in a town far from anywhere she could easily call for help. And then, according to the case files Thai courts would eventually compile, he would kill. Over roughly 4 years, at least 5 women died this way. The murders spanned multiple provinces, different jurisdictions, different local police forces, different rooms in different towns. Behind the geographic scatter, one man was moving with the freedom that only anonymity can provide. That freedom ended in 2005, and this is where the story takes its first strange turn, the turn that 14 years later would lead directly to a rain-soaked field and a fresh body. If this case is gripping you, save this video. You are going to want to come back to this one. When Somkid was arrested in 2005, he confessed. Thai media reported details that painted him as an unusually calm suspect, cooperative with investigators, forthcoming about locations, willing to walk detectives through what he had done. He was tried. He was convicted. He was sentenced to death. But in Thailand, a death sentence is rarely the end of the story. Capital sentences are frequently commuted through royal pardons, a tradition stretching back generations, reflecting the belief that the monarchy holds the ultimate authority over life and death. Over the years, Somkid's sentence was reduced, first to life, then to a fixed term, and in 2019, after approximately 14 years in prison, he was released on parole. This is where the failure begins. There was no public announcement. There was no notice to the communities where he had killed. There was no monitoring of any kind that would prove sufficient to prevent what came next. A man convicted of murdering 5 women simply walked out and vanished into a country of nearly 70 million people. For several months, nothing happened. He drifted. He worked odd jobs. And then in December 2019, in the northeastern province of Kon Keen, a woman was reported missing. She was a masseuse. She had gone with a client to a small local motel. She had not returned. Her body was found soon after in a nearby field. She had been strangled. The choice of victim. The isolated motel room paid for in cash. The signature that only investigators who had studied the earlier files would recognize. The moment a local officer looked at the crime scene, one name surfaced, a name no one in Thai law enforcement had wanted to hear again. The investigation that followed became a national event. Thailand's Central Investigation Bureau, working with provincial police, moved quickly. Because Somkid's earlier case had been so extensively documented, detectives had something invaluable, a full behavioral map of how he had killed the first time, where he took his victims, what kind of rooms he chose, how he checked in. His signature was not just biological, it was procedural. That signature is what led them to the motel. The motel where the December victim had last been seen was small, a modest single-story property common across rural Thailand. It had a front desk. It had a guest ledger, and it had, mounted above the entrance and along its narrow corridor, a set of low-resolution security cameras. Those cameras were the turning point, because the killer had not accounted for one change in the 14 years he had spent behind bars. In the early 2000s, cheap surveillance was rare. Small motels in provincial Thailand had guest books and human memory, nothing more. By 2019, inexpensive digital CCTV had spread almost everywhere. Even the smallest establishment in the smallest town now had cameras. Investigators pulled the footage, and there he was, a man walking down a corridor with the missing woman. His face was not perfectly clear. The resolution was poor, the angle was awkward, but the image was sharp enough to cross-reference against Somkid's prison records, and within hours his photograph was released to the public. That release triggered a nationwide manhunt. Somkid tried to move. He traveled through provinces. He changed clothes. He appeared to be attempting to reach a border. But once his face was on every television in Thailand, and once every driver, shopkeeper, and bus conductor was scanning crowds for him, the country closed around him. He was caught within days, not through DNA, not through phone records, not through any advanced forensic breakthrough. He was caught because a grainy image, captured by a camera that cost less than a month's rent, had been seen by an entire nation. But here is the detail that most coverage misses. When investigators later reviewed his movements in the months after his release, they began combing through missing persons reports from the summer and autumn of 2019, cases involving women in the exact demographic he had always targeted. The full accounting of what he did in those months of freedom may never be publicly complete. To understand Somkid Pumpwang, Forensic behavioral analysts have consistently pointed to a pattern that criminologists describe as target vulnerability selection, the deliberate choice of victims whose disappearance is less likely to trigger immediate, aggressive investigation. He did not stalk strangers on the street. He did not attack public figures. He did not choose victims who lived in tight family units with people who would raise the alarm within hours. He chose women who moved in an economy of anonymity, women who traveled alone to meet clients they did not know, in rooms they had never seen before. That is not a random preference. That is a strategy. And it is the strategy that made his 2019 killing so terrifying to Thai society. When a predator returns to the same pattern after 14 years, it tells forensic psychologists something important. The pattern is not situational. It is not the product of a bad neighborhood, a bad relationship, or a bad decade in someone's life. It is fixed. It is what he is. Experts who reviewed the case in Thai media pointed to the rapid reoffending after release as a case study in the limits of rehabilitation for a very narrow category of offenders. Not all violent criminals repeat. Most, in fact, do not. But there exists a small subset, those who kill more than once, whose method is planned rather than reactive, whose victim selection reveals conscious strategy, for whom release into an unmonitored environment carries an extraordinary risk. Samkid was, by every indicator, in that subset. The fact that he was released with almost no monitoring, no ankle bracelet, no public alert to communities where he had killed, became a national conversation about how the parole system evaluates the most dangerous offenders. There's one more layer to consider: the role of the environment itself. The same anonymity that made his early victims vulnerable had also made him invisible for years. What changed in 2019 was not the killer. What changed was the country. Cheap cameras, widespread digital records, instant news alerts. The old anonymity he depended on had quietly disappeared while he was in prison. He walked out into a Thailand that no longer forgot faces. That is the darker lesson buried inside this case. The technology that finally caught him was not designed for him. It was installed for insurance claims, for petty theft, for disputes over unpaid bills. It was ordinary. And ordinary surveillance, distributed across an entire country, turned out to be a more effective net than the finest specialized investigation. He was convicted a second time. He was sentenced once again to death. This time, few voices in Thailand called for mercy. CTA 1213 Min, cases like this one are not just crime stories. They are windows into how systems fail, how patterns reveal themselves, and how the smallest detail, a security camera nobody thought about, can end a nightmare. If you want more cases documented this way, subscribe and hit the bell icon. New case every day. And drop this in the comments: do you believe a person who kills more than once should ever be eligible for release? I read every reply. This is one I want to hear you on. Outro 1315 Min. There is a temptation when we look at a case like Samkid's to focus on the killer, to study the mind, to ask what makes someone this way. But the more useful question, the one Thai investigators, criminologists, and ordinary citizens are still asking today, is a different one. What does it take to see a predator in a system designed to look away? His first victims were women who moved through an economy of anonymity. His last known victim in December 2019 moved through that same economy. What changed was not the pattern. What changed was that a single camera in a single corridor had finally caught the pattern in motion. He's back in prison. He will not walk out again. But somewhere in the months between his release and his rearrest, there are questions that were never fully answered. Missing persons files that were never closed. Motel corridors whose footage was never pulled. Stories that ended in silence. If this case hit hard, my breakdown of how forensic genealogists are cracking decades-old cold cases will make even more sense now. That video builds on everything you just heard about pattern crime and the tiny, invisible details that finally break these cases open. In 2019, Thailand quietly released one of its most notorious convicted serial killers, a man Thai media had once dubbed Jack the Ripper of Thailand. Within months, a woman was dead in a Kon Keen field. This is the story of Samkid Pumpwang, the pattern that gave him away, and the single grainy security camera in a small provincial motel that ended his second killing spree before it could grow. This documentary examines the failures of the parole system that put him back on the street, the forensic behavioral analysis that predicted his return to violence, and the technological shift that finally trapped a predator who had spent 14 years perfecting anonymity. A Thailand that no longer forgot faces. Timestamps: 0000, the question that cannot be unheard: 00, 45 a killer set free: 02, 00 the pattern nobody connected: 04, 00 14 years then freedom: 06, 00 the corridor camera: 09, 0 inside the mind of a repeat predator. 12. 0 the comment question. 13. 30 what this case really reveals. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. New documented case every day. This channel focuses on verified true crime investigations from around the world, with a focus on cold cases, forensic breakthroughs, and criminal psychology. True crime cold case, criminal psychology, forensics, serial killer, Thailand.